My name is Isabella Carter, and I am 29 years old, and on the day my father's estate was unveiled, I learned just how cruel blood could be. The chandeliers above the mahogany hall glittered with gold. The air smelled of aged wine and expensive perfume, and the crowd buzzed with anticipation like they were waiting for a coronation. I sat in the back, my simple black dress pressed as best as I could manage, my hands folded so tightly in my lap that my knuckles whitened. Across the room, my brother Jonathan, 32, lounged in his tailored navy suit with a silver tie, his hair slicked back like he was already a king. My mother Patricia hovered beside him, her diamond earrings catching the light. Her smile stretched so wide it looked painful, her hand resting proudly on his shoulder. When the lawyer finally cleared his throat and read aloud the words that carved into my soul, the entire hall leaned in. He announced that Jonathan was to receive $75 million, a brand new Tesla, and the family mansion on Long Island. Gasps filled the air, followed by applause, like everyone had just witnessed a scene in a movie where the hero claims his prize. My mother clapped the loudest, leaned close to Jonathan, kissed his cheek, and whispered loudly enough for those nearest to hear, "You are the true heir, the one we always knew would carry the Carter legacy." Laughter rippled through the rows as relatives raised their glasses to toast him. Jonathan stood basking in the glow, lifted his champagne, and declared, "To the rightful heir." His voice rang like a bell of triumph, and the hall erupted in cheers. I sat frozen, every clap striking me like a slap across the face, every cheer a reminder of my place as the invisible daughter. I wanted to vanish into the floor, to disappear into the shadows that had followed me since childhood. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe and the corners of my eyes burned, but I refused to let a tear fall in front of them. As I watched Jonathan grin and bow like a performer soaking in his ovation, I felt the weight of decades of dismissal pressing down on me. My mother's eyes found mine across the room, sharp and cold, and she tilted her head with that condescending smirk that said, without words, "Clap for him, Isabella. Be grateful if he throws you a crumb." A cousin behind me muttered, "Poor Bella, not even a penny," and another chuckled, "She should just be thankful she gets to watch success up close." Their whispers cut deeper than knives. The lawyer stacked his papers, oblivious to my crumbling heart, and everyone crowded around Jonathan to congratulate him, to shake his hand, to call him sir, to predict his glorious future. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails bit into my palms. Rage and humiliation twisted inside me, but beneath it all, something hotter burned, something fierce and unyielding, though I did not yet understand what it was. Just as Jonathan lifted his glass again and the crowd roared, I felt a shadow fall over me. A man I had never seen before, dressed in a black suit that seemed to drink in the light, stepped quietly to my side. His eyes met mine steady and intent, and without a word, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. My breath caught as he placed it in my trembling hands. His voice low, meant only for me. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this." Then he walked away as silently as he had arrived, leaving me, staring at the weight of the paper, the seal pressing into my palm like it held the key to everything I had been denied. My heart pounded louder than the applause echoing through the hall. Everyone was looking at Jonathan, but in that moment, I knew something had shifted, something none of them expected, something that could tear their illusion apart. Long before that envelope ever touched my hands, I had already learned what it meant to live in the shadow of a chosen son. My earliest memories are not of bedtime stories or gentle lullabies, but of Jonathan being lifted onto my father's shoulders, paraded around the backyard like a prince. I would stand at the edge of the porch, my small hands clutching the railing, waiting for someone to notice me. They never did. On Jonathan's 8th birthday, he was given a brand new mountain bike with shiny chrome handles and thick tires that crunched over gravel as he rode in circles, laughing while neighbors gathered to admire the gift. I turned 6 that same week, and my present was a plastic doll from the discount aisle, still smelling faintly of rubber, the kind of toy you give when you need to give something but your heart is not in it. I clutched that doll as Jonathan sped past me, the cheers for him drowning out my silence. At family dinners, my mother would heap Jonathan's plate high with steak and potatoes, praising him for his appetite, while she glanced at me and said, "Isabella, eat quietly. Don't make a mess." When Jonathan brought home even the simplest drawing from school, it was pinned to the refrigerator like a masterpiece framed by magnets shaped like crowns. When I brought home an essay with a teacher's note calling it exceptional, my mother barely glanced at it before sliding it under a pile of bills. My father's voice boomed with pride whenever Jonathan entered the room. "This is my son," he would say, "the one who will carry our name forward, the one who will build our empire." When he looked at me, his words were softer, almost dismissive. "Isabella helps around the house. She is ordinary." That word ordinary clung to me like a brand. I was 7 years old when I first realized that in my parents' eyes, love had conditions, and those conditions were wealth, charm, and the golden glow that Jonathan carried without effort. At school, the difference followed me. Jonathan arrived in pressed clothes, his backpack filled with new supplies, while mine were hand-me-downs with zippers that stuck and notebooks already creased. Teachers greeted him by name, impressed by his confident smile, while I slipped into my seat unnoticed. Even the neighbors mirrored my parents. They would wave at Jonathan, calling out, "There goes the future of the Carters," while patting my head absent-mindedly as though I were part of the scenery. One Christmas still burns in my mind. Jonathan unwrapped a gleaming electric keyboard, my father announcing that he was destined to compose greatness while relatives applauded. My box contained a pair of socks. I remember folding them carefully, pretending to be grateful, while inside me something hardened. I stopped asking for things. I stopped hoping for recognition. Instead, I watched. I listened, and I learned what it meant to be invisible in your own home. As the years passed, Jonathan's pedestal grew taller. At 12, he was enrolled in private school, his tuition paid without hesitation. I begged to go too, to at least share the same opportunities, but my mother shook her head and said, "We can't afford two. You'll do fine where you are." Fine meant crowded classrooms, broken lockers, and teachers too exhausted to notice if you excelled. Jonathan returned home with stories of field trips to museums, science labs with gleaming equipment friends whose parents were CEOs. I returned home with secondhand textbooks and dreams that felt like they belonged to someone else. Still, I tried to win them over. I cleaned the kitchen until the counter shone, helped Jonathan with his projects, took care of chores without being asked. But each time the reward was the same: a nod, a muttered, "Good, now go." My sacrifices were invisible. His smallest efforts were miracles. By the time I turned 13, I had learned to keep my achievements to myself. When I won a regional essay contest, I slipped the ribbon into a drawer and told no one. When Jonathan scored a goal at soccer, the whole family went out to dinner to celebrate. The divide was no longer a crack in the foundation of our family. It was a canyon wide and deep, and I was stranded on one side while the rest of them built a palace on the other. Even then, a part of me still yearned. I wanted one moment, just one, where my parents would look at me with the same pride they reserved for Jonathan. That moment never came. Instead, I learned to swallow disappointment like medicine, bitter but familiar, a routine that shaped the bones of my childhood. And in that shaping, though I could not see it then, something else was being forged, resilience quiet but unbreakable. By the time I reached high school, the divide between Jonathan and me had grown so vast it felt like we lived in different worlds under the same roof. He moved through life with ease, his path paved with my parents' money and pride, while mine was littered with chores and obligations that swallowed my youth whole. When other girls spent afternoons at the mall trying on dresses, I spent mine scrubbing the kitchen floor, folding laundry, and watching pots of stew simmer while my mother lounged with a glass of wine. Prom season came and went like a cruel joke. Jonathan rented a limousine, bought a tuxedo tailored to perfection, and whisked his date to the ballroom under a canopy of lights. My mother beamed, snapping photos until her camera battery died. That same night, I stayed home babysitting my younger cousins because, as my mother reminded me, family comes first. Isabella, and besides, prom isn't for everyone. I pressed my forehead against the window as headlights disappeared down the street, knowing I would never dance beneath those chandeliers, never wear a corsage, never have that rite of passage. At 16, Jonathan was gifted his first car, a glossy black Jeep, the kind of vehicle that announced his arrival before he even stepped out. The whole neighborhood gathered to admire it, my father bragging about his son's bright future. On my 16th birthday, I woke to the sound of my alarm clock and the smell of pancakes I had cooked myself because no one else remembered. When my mother finally walked into the kitchen, she handed me a list of errands, muttering, "Happy birthday, Isabella, don't be late picking up dry cleaning." My youth was not measured in parties or sports or carefree laughter. It was measured in grocery bags cutting into my palms in late nights, balancing homework with endless chores, and mornings waking early to prepare Jonathan's favorite breakfast before he left for school. When friends invited me out to movies or football games, I learned to shake my head with a smile, claiming I was too busy, when the truth was that saying yes would mean hearing my mother's scorn. "Who will clean this house if not you? Who will make sure dinner is ready? Do you think Jonathan should come home hungry after practice?" I swallowed my resentment because arguing only brought more punishment. There were nights I lay in bed listening to the distant echoes of Jonathan's laughter as he returned from parties, his voice ringing through the halls like he owned not just the house, but time itself, while mine slipped away in silence. Summer vacations were no different. Jonathan traveled with friends to the shore, to concerts, to family trips my parents funded without question. I spent those same summers cleaning guest rooms for relatives working shifts at the local diner to earn pocket money and mowing lawns to help pay bills that were never mine to bear. Every dollar I earned disappeared into the household, my mother patting my arm and saying, "That's what good daughters do." I told myself it was temporary, that someday my sacrifices would be recognized, that hard work and patience would prove my worth. But recognition never came. At 17, when Jonathan was preparing for college tours, my parents arranged private visits, hotel stays, dinners with alumni. They bought him new clothes, a laptop, and spoke endlessly about his bright future. When I asked about college, my father's response was sharp. "Jonathan is the one with potential. You should stay close, help your mother." There was no discussion, no consideration, just the assumption that my place was here tethered to responsibility. That night, I sat on the porch alone, listening to crickets in the dark, feeling the weight of years pressing down. My youth had slipped away in fragments, each moment sacrificed on the altar of a family that never saw me. I watched the stars and whispered a promise to myself, a fragile vow that one day I would claim something of my own, though I did not yet know how. Adulthood did not bring freedom. It only tightened the chains. By the time I turned 20, I was working 2 jobs, a receptionist at a small insurance office by day and a waitress at a local diner by night. My friends were exploring their early 20s with laughter and freedom, but my life was a cycle of fluorescent lights, ringing phones, trays heavy with plates, and aching feet. Every paycheck I earned was swallowed by bills that were not mine: utility payments, grocery receipts, even Jonathan's car insurance when he conveniently forgot. Whenever I questioned it, my mother's reply was the same, sharp as a slap. "That's what good daughters do, Isabella. You help family. Jonathan doesn't need that burden. He needs to focus on his career." But Jonathan's career was not a struggle. It was a red carpet. At 21, he was sent to an Ivy League university, his tuition and living expenses covered without hesitation. He wore designer suits to interviews arranged through my father's connections, internships that paid more in a summer than I made in a year. At family gatherings, my parents bragged about his brilliance, his potential, his inevitable greatness. When the conversation shifted to me, it was with polite shrugs. "Isabella is hardworking," they would say, as though it were a consolation prize, as though breaking my back to keep the household afloat was nothing but a footnote. I wanted to scream that my sacrifice was the foundation of everything they celebrated. While Jonathan traveled abroad for internships in Europe, I was scrubbing dishes and calculating whether I could afford to replace my worn-out shoes. While he sipped wine in Paris, I was carrying trays of burgers and fries in a diner that smelled of grease and exhaustion. The contrast was unbearable, and yet my family refused to see it. My 20s slipped away in fluorescent shifts, my body aching, my spirit quietly hardening. At 23, I was offered a promotion at the insurance office, a chance to move into a better role with higher pay and actual stability. For a fleeting moment, I thought perhaps my sacrifices were over, that I could finally build a life of my own. But my mother intervened with cold precision. "That job will take you away from home, Isabella, and we need you here. Jonathan is preparing to launch his first startup and he'll need support. Do you think we can handle everything without you?" My promotion vanished like smoke. I stayed trapped by their expectations once again, forfeiting my chance at independence. Jonathan's startup, funded by my father and a circle of wealthy friends, failed within a year. But instead of facing consequences, he was rescued. They called it a learning experience, praised his courage, and immediately funded his next venture. Meanwhile, I was scolded for sighing too loudly, for dreaming too much, for daring to want something beyond the walls of our house. I kept going. I worked through exhaustion, through illness, through nights where my body begged for rest. My 20s became a blur of sacrifice, one year bleeding into the next, the scent of stale coffee and grease my constant companions. I missed birthdays, weddings, reunions. My youth, already stolen in high school, was consumed entirely in adulthood by obligations I never chose. Still, I clung to the faint hope that if I endured long enough, they would see me finally as more than the invisible daughter. That hope was cruel. At 26, when Jonathan secured yet another round of funding, the family celebrated with a lavish party. Champagne flowed, music blasted, and relatives toasted to his genius. I stood in the corner, unnoticed, my hands raw from a double shift at the diner. When I excused myself early, my mother hissed, "Don't embarrass us, Isabella. Smile for your brother." Always it was about him. Always my sacrifices were erased while his failures were recast as triumphs. By 28, the realization settled deep in my bones. No matter what I gave, it would never be enough. My labor, my money, my youth, all of it vanished into a void of family expectation. Jonathan soared on the wings I built, while I remained shackled to the ground. And yet, somewhere beneath the exhaustion, a spark of defiance smoldered. I did not know when or how, but I knew that someday I would not just endure. Someday I would rise. If my youth had been stolen in silence, my early adulthood was stolen in spectacle. Every gathering became a stage where my worthlessness was displayed for others to see, each humiliation another stone added to the wall that separated me from the family I longed to belong to. When I graduated from college, it should have been a milestone, a moment to celebrate perseverance in the face of endless obstacles. I crossed the stage in a plain black gown, my heart pounding with quiet pride, scanning the crowd for a familiar face. There was none. My parents had promised to come, but on the morning of the ceremony, my mother called with a casual tone, "Jonathan has a big presentation today, and we cannot miss it. You understand." And so I sat alone at a diner afterward, my cap resting on the seat beside me, watching families laugh and take photos together while my phone stayed silent. The following year, Jonathan graduated from his Ivy League program, and the celebration was nothing short of a royal coronation. A ballroom was rented, a photographer hired, champagne flowed like water. My parents stood beside him, tears of pride in their eyes, announcing to anyone who would listen that their son was destined for greatness. I attended, of course, standing in the shadows with a polite smile plastered on my face, clapping at the right times, nodding when relatives gushed about Jonathan's brilliance. Not one person asked about my job, my life, my achievements. I was invisible even in plain sight. The cruelty did not stop at neglect, it sharpened into open mockery. At a family barbecue one summer, Jonathan raised his glass and announced loudly, "Isabella works 2 jobs and still can't afford a decent car. Maybe one day she'll catch up." Laughter rippled through the crowd, my mother chuckling, my father shaking his head with feigned disappointment. My cheeks burned so hot I thought my skin would blister, but I swallowed the humiliation and forced a smile. To defend myself would only confirm their belief that I was weak. Another time during Thanksgiving dinner, as I carefully placed dishes on the table, my aunt leaned toward my mother and whispered, "It's good she's useful at least, since she'll never be the star." Jonathan smirked, spearing a piece of turkey, and added, "Maybe she was born to serve." The words cut so deeply I had to excuse myself, standing in the bathroom with the door locked, staring into the mirror at eyes brimming with tears I refused to let fall. Humiliation followed me outside the home as well. Neighbors congratulated my parents on Jonathan's latest business venture, his travels, his luxury car. When they glanced at me, their smiles turned awkward polite. One even said Jonathan is really making the family proud. "What is it you do again?" "Isabella." The question carried no malice, but it stripped me bare all the same. Each encounter left me smaller, quieter, more determined to endure without complaint. Yet the weight of invisibility pressed heavier with every passing year. What made it unbearable was not just the words, but the certainty with which they were delivered. My family did not wonder if Jonathan was better. They knew it as fact. They did not debate my value, they dismissed it entirely. That kind of certainty becomes a prison, and I lived behind its bars every day, a reminder that in their eyes I would never be enough. And yet deep inside, beneath the humiliation and bitterness, there was a stubborn ember. Each cruel remark, each forgotten milestone, each public dismissal fed that ember until it glowed small but steady. I could not yet imagine how, but I knew one day that ember would ignite, and the fire it unleashed would consume the lies they had built. Not everyone in my family was blind. There was one man whose eyes saw past the golden glow that surrounded Jonathan, one man who recognized what I had endured, even when I spoke no words of complaint. My grandfather, Edward Carter, was already in his 80s when I reached my mid-20s. His body frail, but his mind sharp as ever. He had built the Carter name with his own hands, rising from nothing to create the company that my father and brother boasted about as if they had earned it. Unlike them, he remembered the weight of sacrifice, the sting of being underestimated. He saw those same scars etched across my life. I used to visit him in his modest study, a room lined with shelves of worn books and old ledgers, the scent of leather and tobacco lingering in the air. While Jonathan rarely set foot in that room, too busy chasing parties and investments, I came often bringing him tea, sitting quietly, as he told me stories of struggle and perseverance. One winter evening when the house was silent, except for the crackling fire, he reached across his desk and placed his weathered hand over mine. His skin was thin, the veins raised like rivers, but his grip was strong. "Isabella," he said, his voice low but steady, "do not think I have not noticed what you have given. Your youth has been stolen by duties that were never yours to bear. You have sacrificed without recognition, but that does not make your sacrifice invisible." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let his words settle into the hollow space carved out by years of neglect. But doubt was my constant companion. "They will never see me, Grandpa," I whispered. "They never will." He leaned closer, his gray eyes sharp as steel. "One day, Isabella, the truth will protect you. You have something they do not. You have resilience, integrity, and heart. Those are worth more than money, more than mansions, more than cars. Do not forget that." His words wrapped around me like a shield, fragile but powerful. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Still, I doubted whether his belief could ever outweigh the chorus of dismissal from the rest of my family. Yet I carried those words with me, tucked away like a secret talisman. When I was mocked at gatherings, I heard his voice reminding me that truth endures. When I was exhausted from double shifts, I recalled his assurance that my strength was unique. Jonathan never visited him unless there was a photo opportunity. He would show up with flashy gifts, snap a few pictures, and leave. My grandfather would smile politely but later sigh, shaking his head. He knew Jonathan's charm was shallow, propped up by wealth and entitlement. He knew the foundation was rotten. In his final months, when illness kept him bedridden, I became his caretaker. I read to him from his favorite books, brought him soup, listened to his recollections of the company's earliest days when success was measured in grit, not gold. One night when his breathing was ragged and the end hovered close, he whispered, "Isabella, promise me you will not let them break you. Promise me you will stand tall when the time comes." Tears blurred my vision, but I nodded. "I promise, Grandpa." His hand squeezed mine weakly and he gave a faint smile. "Good. Then know this, I have taken steps. You will not be left unprotected." The words puzzled me, but before I could ask, he closed his eyes, drifting into a restless sleep. A week later, he was gone. At the funeral, Jonathan posed for photos with executives. My mother wept dramatically into her silk handkerchief, and I stood quietly by the casket, the promise I had made burning in my chest. His words echoed through me like a prophecy. I did not yet know what steps he had taken, what truth he meant, but I clung to it. In a family that had stripped me of dignity, he had given me something irreplaceable: hope. The day of the estate announcement arrived with all the spectacle of a royal ceremony. The hall was filled with relatives dressed in glittering gowns and sharp suits, their voices buzzing with anticipation as though they were about to witness the crowning of a king. Crystal chandeliers spilled light across the marble floors. Glasses of champagne clinked, and servers glided by with trays of hors d'oeuvres no one touched because everyone was waiting for the moment. I stood near the back, trying to make myself small, though the weight of 100 eyes reminded me I was already the subject of whispered pity. Jonathan in his custom-tailored suit soaked in the attention. He laughed easily, shook hands posed for photos with distant cousins who congratulated him as if the outcome were already certain. My mother hovered beside him, pride radiating from her every gesture, her hand clutching his arm as though he were the only anchor in her world. The lawyer cleared his throat. The room fell silent, and the words I had dreaded carved the air like knives. Jonathan Carter will inherit $75 million, a brand new Tesla, and the Carter Mansion on Long Island. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then applause exploded, thunderous and relentless, echoing off the high ceiling. Relatives rose to their feet, cheering, glasses lifted in toasts. My mother embraced Jonathan, tears of pride streaking her perfectly painted cheeks. She pressed a kiss to his cheek and whispered loudly enough for nearby ears, "You are the true heir, the one we always knew would carry our legacy." Jonathan smiled, lifted his champagne, and declared with theatrical flourish, "To the rightful heir." The hall erupted in cheers once more, the sound pounding in my ears like drums. My body stiffened, my hands trembling at my sides. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor and escape the suffocating weight of humiliation. But I could not move. I was pinned in place by the smirks and whispers. Poor Bella, not even a penny. At least Jonathan will take care of her if he's generous. She should be grateful to breathe the same air as success. Each word landed like a lash, tearing at the fragile armor I had built over years of invisibility. My mother's eyes found me across the room, sharp and cold, and she tilted her head with a smirk that said everything without needing words. "Clap, Isabella. Show your gratitude. Maybe he'll toss you crumbs." The humiliation burned hotter when Jonathan approached the center of the hall, basking in the glow. Cameras flashed, relatives clapped him on the back, executives muttered praise about his brilliance and leadership. He wore their admiration like a crown, and I stood in the shadows, the forgotten daughter. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur, but I forced the tears back. They would not see me break. They would never see me broken again. Jonathan raised his glass once more, smirking as he scanned the room, his gaze deliberately passing over me before he spoke. "Tonight we celebrate the Carter legacy, and I promise to honor it with the greatness expected of me." My mother nodded proudly, her hand squeezing his arm as though sealing the oath. Around me, relatives murmured approval, some even dabbing tears from their eyes as if they had witnessed history. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that behind the glitter and applause was rot, that everything they celebrated had been built on my silence, my sacrifices, my stolen youth. But my voice caught in my chest, and all I could do was clench my fists, nails digging into my palms until pain steadied me. In that moment, I thought the night had reached its cruelest point, that the humiliation had peaked. But the truth was still waiting, wrapped in a sealed envelope, waiting to tear through their illusions like a storm. Just when I thought the night could not press me deeper into humiliation, I felt a presence at my side, a shift in the air that pulled me from the shadows. A man I had never seen before, dressed in a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light, stepped quietly toward me. His expression was unreadable, his eyes steady but not unkind. He did not bow to the glittering performance unfolding in the center of the hall. He did not join the applause. Instead, he leaned close enough that his words reached only me. "Isabella Carter," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "Your grandfather wanted you to have this." He slipped a sealed envelope into my trembling hands, then retreated with the same silence that cloaked his arrival. For a moment, I could only stare, my heart pounding louder than the cheers for Jonathan. The paper felt heavier than its weight, as though it carried the gravity of years of secrets long buried. I looked down at the seal pressed into the envelope, Edward Carter's insignia, a crest I had seen etched into the spines of his old ledgers, the same symbol he once traced with his finger when telling me about the foundations of the family business. My breath caught. I remembered his voice, raspy but firm, in his final days. "I have taken steps. You will not be left unprotected." My fingers shook as I broke the seal. Inside, neatly folded, was a set of documents stamped and notarized. My eyes scanned the words, my pulse quickening with every line. It was a will, my grandfather's true will, separate from the one being paraded tonight. According to the documents, I was named the heir to his controlling shares in Carter Enterprises, the original mansion deed, and a trust fund worth $30 million. The heir seemed to vanish from the room, though no one else knew what I held. My vision blurred as I read his handwritten note attached to the documents, the shaky script unmistakably his. To Isabella, the one who gave when no one else did. You are the true strength of this family. I entrust this legacy to you not because of entitlement, but because you earned it through sacrifice, dignity, and resilience. Do not let them convince you otherwise. Edward Carter. My knees nearly buckled, and I gripped the envelope tighter, the words searing into my soul. For so long I had been invisible, dismissed, mocked. And yet, here in black ink was proof that someone had seen me, truly seen me, and believed I was worthy of more than scraps. I glanced around the hall. No one was looking at me. All eyes were fixed on Jonathan as he soaked in his manufactured glory. My mother beamed beside him, the proud queen beside her chosen king. The applause continued, blind and deaf to the truth I now held. My heart hammered with the weight of choice. I could keep silent retreat into the shadows as I always had, clutching this secret close. Or I could break the silence, and risk everything. The memory of my grandfather's voice steadied me. One day, Isabella, the truth will protect you. My hands stopped trembling. I slid the documents back into the envelope, tucking it close to my chest. Tonight would not end as they expected. The humiliation they thought complete was about to crack, and through that crack truth would blaze. The applause was still echoing when I rose from my chair, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. My knees trembled, but my voice when it came was steady, sharper than I imagined it could be. You all forgot one thing, I said, the words slicing through the clamor. You forgot Grandpa's voice. The room fell into uneasy silence. Heads turned, faces blinked in confusion. Jonathan lowered his glass, annoyance flickering across his features. My mother's lips tightened into a thin line. What are you doing, Isabella? She hissed, her voice dripping with warning. I ignored her. My fingers pulled the documents from the envelope and I held them high so the crowd could see. This, I declared, is Edward Carter's true will. Gasps rippled through the hall, whispers rising like a wave. Jonathan laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Don't embarrass yourself, Bella. Sit down before you make a fool of us all. But I did not sit. I unfolded the papers with deliberate care, the legal stamps gleaming under the chandelier's light. These are notarized, witnessed, and sealed. They name me, not Jonathan, as the rightful heir to my grandfather's controlling shares, his original estate, and his trust fund. Murmurs grew louder. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. Some craned their necks to catch a better glimpse of the documents. The lawyer at the podium frowned, uncertain, while my mother stepped forward, her voice rising in fury. Lies. Fabrications. My father already settled everything. Edward would never bypass his own grandson. At that moment, the stranger who had handed me the envelope stepped into the light. He introduced himself clearly, his voice carrying. My name is Charles Harris. I was Edward Carter's personal attorney for the past 15 years. These documents are authentic, signed, and executed according to his wishes. I was instructed to deliver them to Isabella personally on this night. Shock cracked through the crowd. Jonathan's face flushed crimson, his smirk faltering. No, this is absurd. Everyone knows I'm the heir. He turned to the relatives, searching for support, but the certainty in his eyes was beginning to fracture. Charles Harris continued, his tone calm but unyielding. Edward Carter left behind not only these documents, but also a recording to ensure there would be no dispute. My breath caught. A recording. He reached into his case and pulled out a USB drive, handing it to the estate's lawyer. Within moments, the large screen at the front of the hall flickered to life. And then, my grandfather's face appeared worn but resolute, his voice gravelly yet strong. If you are seeing this, it means my wishes are being questioned. Let me be clear. Jonathan, you were given every advantage, every resource, yet you squandered them. Isabella, you were given little, yet you gave everything. She is the one with true strength, true resilience, true integrity. She sacrificed her youth for this family, and I will not allow her to be erased. My legacy belongs to her." Gasps filled the room louder this time, layered with disbelief and awe. Some relatives covered their mouths, others exchanged wide-eyed glances. Jonathan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. My mother shook her head violently, muttering, "No, no, this cannot be," but the evidence was undeniable. The documents in my hands, the attorney's testimony, and now my grandfather's voice beyond the grave, all aligned into a truth brighter than any chandelier in that hall. I lowered the papers, my heart pounding, and looked directly at Jonathan. "For years you mocked me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "You thought I was invisible. Tonight I stand here as the heir Grandpa chose, the one he trusted, the one who will carry his true legacy." The silence that followed was thicker than stone, every eye fixed on me waiting for Jonathan's response. The silence shattered as Jonathan's voice exploded across the hall. "This is a setup," he roared, his face twisted with rage. "These papers are forged. That video is manipulated." He jabbed a finger toward me, his eyes blazing. "She did this. She orchestrated this pathetic charade because she couldn't stand being nothing." The crowd murmured, shifting uneasily, their cheers from earlier curdling into whispers of doubt. My mother surged forward, her heels clicking against the marble like gunshots. Her voice was shrill, desperate. "Don't listen to this nonsense. Isabella has always been jealous of her brother. She has always tried to undermine him. She would stoop to anything for attention." She turned to me, her eyes like daggers. "How dare you, Isabella? After everything we gave you, this is how you repay us." Her words sparked a fire in my chest, a fury that had been building for years, a fury I no longer intended to swallow. I stepped forward, the envelope still in my grip, my voice rising to meet theirs. "Everything you gave me," I repeated the words, sharp. "You gave me nothing. You gave me chores, silence, humiliation. You gave me the role of servant while you crowned Jonathan king." My voice grew stronger with each word, the years of suppression burning away. "I sacrificed my youth for this family while you ignored me. I worked jobs you never acknowledged. I kept this house together while Jonathan wasted your money, and all you ever called me was ordinary." The word dripped from my lips like poison, and I saw several relatives shift uncomfortably, the truth striking them harder than they expected. Jonathan sneered, his voice shaking with fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing, Bella. You've always been nothing." His words once would have gutted me, but not tonight. Tonight I lifted my chin and stared him down. "No, Jonathan. I am the one Grandpa trusted. I am the one who stood when everyone else walked away. You cannot erase that with insults anymore." My mother's face flushed red, her hand trembling as she tried to snatch the documents from me. But Charles Harris, the attorney, stepped forward, blocking her with a firm voice. "These papers are legal and binding. The trust is in Isabella's name. The shares are in Isabella's name. The mansion deed is in Isabella's name." His words rang like gongs, each one sealing the truth further. The crowd gasped again, whispers swelling into waves. My mother's fury broke into desperation. "You cannot do this. She is not capable of leading this family. She is weak. She is nothing without us." I laughed then, not out of humor but out of disbelief at the irony. "Weak," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Weak is letting others fight your battles while you bask in their labor. Weak is wasting everything handed to you. I was the one who endured, who worked, who carried this family when no one else would. I was never weak." Jonathan lunged toward me, his face twisted with rage, but several relatives stepped between us, murmuring, "Enough. Jonathan, enough." They were no longer clapping him on the back, no longer raising glasses in his honor. Their eyes had shifted sharp and wary, as though they were seeing him for the first time. My mother collapsed into a chair, her hand clutching her pearls, her face pale with shock. She looked at me as though she no longer recognized the daughter she had dismissed all her life. I stood taller than I ever had, my voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You tried to erase me. You tried to convince me I was nothing. But tonight, in front of everyone, I claim my place. The place Grandpa meant for me. And no amount of shouting, no amount of denial will ever take that away. The hall was silent, thick with tension, the weight of truth pressing down on every heart. Jonathan's chest heaved, his eyes wild, but his words had run out. For the first time, he was the one silenced. The hall fell into a tense silence, the weight of years of injustice pressing down on Jonathan and my mother alike. Charles Harris, the attorney, stepped forward, holding the sealed documents high for everyone to see. "These are the binding instruments left by Edward Carter," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "All shares of Carter Enterprises, the original family mansion, and the trust fund are legally in Isabella Carter's name." The room seemed to tilt under the force of his words. Relatives exchanged astonished glances, some gripping the arms of their chairs, others whispering to neighbors, "Is this for real?" Jonathan's face drained of color, the smirk he had worn so effortlessly throughout the evening disappearing like smoke in a windstorm. My mother opened her mouth, perhaps to argue, perhaps to protest, but no words came. The weight of undeniable proof had silenced her. I felt a thrill of vindication rise through me, tempered by the gravity of what this meant. I stepped toward the center of the room, my head held high, the envelope tucked firmly against my chest. I could see Jonathan's fists clenching his jaw, rigid, his eyes flicking nervously to the documents, then to the attorney, then back to me. No amount of rage could rewrite what was true. He had spent his life in privilege, thriving on advantages he had not earned. He had been praised for everything from minor successes to spectacular failures, while I had endured, labored, sacrificed, and persevered in silence. Tonight the scales tipped. Tonight the foundation of their entitlement cracked. I raised my voice, ensuring every word was heard. For years I was told I was nothing I said, and for years I endured silent and overlooked. Tonight, I stand as the rightful heir chosen by the one person in this family whose judgment mattered Grandpa. The truth cannot be erased and it cannot be ignored. Around me, the crowd shifted. Some guests had tears in their eyes, others looked stunned, others began to nod in acknowledgement. They had watched the narrative of the family for years, seen Jonathan as the golden son, and now they were confronted with a reality they could not deny. Even the distant cousins and family friends leaned forward, craning to see the documents and the woman standing before them. My mother finally found her voice, trembling, pleading. "Isabella, you don't understand. This cannot happen. Jonathan, my son, the family's legacy is yours." I held the documents higher, letting the light glint off the embossed seals. "It is happening," I said calmly, firmly. "Grandpa trusted me because I proved through years of sacrifice and endurance that I am worthy. The shares, the trust, the mansion, they are mine, and they have been for years. I did not steal anything. I claim what was always intended for me." Jonathan staggered back, incredulous, a mix of fury and fear crossing his face. He opened his mouth, then closed it, no words capable of meeting the truth before him. For the first time in his life, he was powerless in a room that had once celebrated his every move. My mother sank into a chair, her hand gripping her pearls so tightly that they cut into her palm. Her perfect composure had cracked, leaving only shock and silent fury. Guests began to murmur, then applaud, hesitant at first, then growing louder, echoing through the marble hall. Their cheers were not for Jonathan or my mother, but for me. They had witnessed the collapse of false hierarchy, the recognition of true merit, and they responded instinctively. I felt the surge of justice course through me, tempered by relief. The envelope, once a symbol of secret hope, was now a tangible emblem of vindication. I had endured humiliation, been overlooked, dismissed, mocked, and yet I had persevered. Tonight, all of that suffering coalesced into authority recognition and the legal right to the legacy that had been denied to me for so long. I turned to Jonathan, his shoulders slumped, eyes wide, lips pressed tight. No sneer, no laughter, no confidence remained. He looked smaller than he had ever looked, stripped of the armor built by favoritism and privilege. My mother's lips quivered, her perfect smile vanished, her eyes darting away from mine. And in that moment, I understood fully the power of truth, of endurance, of silent sacrifice finally recognized. I did not gloat, I did not mock. I simply stood tall and resolute, allowing the evidence of justice to speak for itself. The room erupted once more, applause filling the hall, no longer a celebration of a golden sun, but a recognition of the daughter who had endured everything to claim her rightful place. The relief was overwhelming, the sense of closure almost dizzying. After years of being invisible, of being dismissed and undervalued, I was finally seen. Truly seen not for superficial accomplishments, but for the person I had proven myself to be, through resilience, integrity, and courage. The scales had balanced. The legacy, the wealth, the authority all now belonged to the one who had earned it. The hall gradually emptied, chandeliers dimmed, and the echoes of applause faded into soft murmurs. I stepped outside into the cool night air of Long Island, the scent of the ocean drifting in with the breeze, and finally felt it, a weight lifting from my shoulders, the heavy burden of years of invisibility, of being dismissed, of sacrificed youth, of unnoticed labor. I clutched the envelope one last time, then tucked it safely into my jacket, a reminder of the moment when truth and justice converged. The mansion before me, bathed in the glow of outdoor lights, reflected a future I had only dreamed of in fragments. Fragments of nights spent cleaning, of hours spent working jobs that no one acknowledged, of birthdays, holidays, and small victories lost to the shadows of Jonathan's privilege. But I had endured, and now endurance had its reward. I breathed deeply, letting the salty night air fill my lungs, the sound of waves distant but steady like the pulse of life itself. For decades, my family had defined me by what I lacked, by their perception of worth, measured in wealth, charisma, and obedience. They had stripped me of my youth, overlooked my labor, and dismissed my dreams. Tonight, their perception was overturned. I had not stolen what was theirs. I had claimed what had always been mine, sanctioned and blessed by the one whose judgment truly mattered, my grandfather Edward. I looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky and thought of the quiet moments I had spent on the porch as a girl, imagining a life beyond chores and unacknowledged effort. Those moments had taught me resilience. Those moments had prepared me for this night. Jonathan and my mother had left the hall hours ago, their faces pale with humiliation, their authority undermined not by force but by the clarity of truth. The crowd that remained had witnessed something profound, a recalibration of justice in a family long ruled by favoritism. Some relatives approached me now, their expressions softened, apologies murmured for the years of oversight and dismissal. Their recognition was welcome, but it was not necessary. The validation I needed had come from within, and from the one who mattered most, the man who had seen the value in endurance and integrity. I felt a rush of clarity and freedom. My youth, once considered stolen, had forged in me a strength they could never replicate. My sacrifices had not been in vain. They had honed my judgment, my courage, and my capacity to claim what was rightfully mine. As I walked toward the mansion, the keys in my hand, I imagined the future unfolding. A future where my decisions were respected, my voice carried weight, and my autonomy was unassailable. Money and property were only part of the legacy. The greater inheritance was confidence, self-respect, and the certainty that endurance and truth outlasted arrogance and privilege. I paused at the grand entrance, my reflection in the polished glass doors showing a woman transformed not only by the fortune bestowed upon me, but by the knowledge of my worth, affirmed by justice and resilience. For anyone listening to this story, particularly those who have been overlooked, dismissed, or undervalued, take this to heart. Your worth is not measured by the accolades others bestow upon you, nor by the favoritism or neglect of family or peers. It is forged in your perseverance, your integrity, and the courage to stand when circumstances attempt to diminish you. Life may demand sacrifices of your time, your comfort, even your youth, and those sacrifices may go unnoticed by many. But one day, the truth will reveal itself, and the endurance you have cultivated will become your most potent weapon. I pushed open the doors, stepping into the space that had once symbolized privilege for another, now fully and rightfully mine. The mansion was quiet, every room echoing the possibilities I had longed for. I could finally make choices for myself, create a life defined not by others' perceptions but by my vision, ambition, and values. The weight of decades of expectation, judgment, and dismissal had transformed into a foundation upon which I could build. And in that transformation lay a lesson for anyone who has ever been called less made to feel invisible or forced to stand in the shadow of another. Endure, persist, and believe in the quiet strength you cultivate. It may take time, and the world may remain blind to your value for years, but the truth you carry within yourself is unassailable. Tonight, I was no longer the girl who cleaned floors and ran errands while my brother soaked in praise. I was Isabella Carter, 30 years old, heir not only to a fortune, but to recognition, respect, and the right to determine my own path. I inhaled deeply, letting the night air carry away the remnants of doubt and shame. The stars overhead seemed brighter, the ocean sound steadier, as if the universe itself was acknowledging my journey. I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Grandpa, for seeing me when no one else would." I stepped fully into the mansion, closing the door behind me with a quiet but definitive click. This was my beginning, and to everyone watching, I offer this. If you have been undervalued, if your sacrifices have gone unnoticed, if the world tells you that you are nothing, remember this night. Stand, speak, and when your moment comes, claim it with certainty. The world may resist, but the truth you hold within yourself will always prevail.